The fluorescent lights hummed above me as I watched Mrs. Chen's chest rise and fall in that mechanical rhythm that meant the machines were doing most of the work now. It was 11:47 p.m., 3 hours past the end of my shift, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Her family had gone home hours ago, exhausted from days of vigil, and she was alone. Nobody should die alone, especially not in the sterile coldness of Chicago General's ICU. I had been working as a respiratory therapist here for 2 years, and I'd seen enough patients slip away in the middle of the night to know the signs. Mrs. Chen's oxygen saturation kept dropping despite the ventilator working at maximum capacity. Her skin had that waxy pallor that comes before the end. The night shift nurses were swamped with emergencies from a multi-car accident on the Dan Ryan Expressway, so I made a choice that would change everything. I pulled up the uncomfortable plastic chair closer to her bed and took her frail hand in mine. Her skin felt paper-thin, cold despite the heated blankets. "You're not alone," I whispered in English, then tried my broken Mandarin. "NIBU Shuri Ji Run." I hoped I was saying it right. The ICU was quieter than usual, just the constant beeping of monitors and the whoosh of ventilators, keeping a dozen patients alive. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something else, that unmistakable scent of approaching death that experienced medical staff learned to recognize. I'd grown up in a family where we sat with the dying, where death was treated as a sacred transition, not a medical failure. My grandmother had taught me that holding someone's hand as they passed was one of the most important things you could do. Mrs. Chen's fingers twitched slightly in mine. Maybe she could feel my presence. Maybe it was just involuntary muscle contractions. Either way, I squeezed gently and started talking to her about Chicago, about the beautiful autumn colors in Millennium Park, about how the city looked from the lakeshore. Anything to fill the silence with human warmth. "The leaves are turning now," I told her. "Golden and red, like the maples in Lincoln Park. Your granddaughter mentioned you loved walking there." I glanced at the family photo taped to her bedside table. 3 generations smiling at Navy Pier, Mrs. Chen in the center wearing a bright red sweater. That's when I heard the sharp click of expensive dress shoes on the linoleum floor behind me. I turned to see Dr. Marcus Harrison, the chief of internal medicine, standing in the doorway. His tall frame filled the entrance, his silver hair perfectly styled even at this late hour. The expression on his face made my stomach drop. "Miss Rodriguez," his voice cut through the quiet like a scalpel. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I felt my face flush hot. I was just... Mrs. Chen was alone, and I thought. "You thought what?" "That you could decide to provide unauthorized care outside your scope of practice." He stepped into the room, and I noticed 2 other staff members had appeared behind him. Janet from night nursing and Dr. Sarah Kim, one of the residents. Great. An audience for whatever was about to happen. I carefully released Mrs. Chen's hand and stood up, my legs shaky from sitting for so long. "Dr. Harrison, I was just keeping her company. I wasn't providing any medical interventions. I was simply... You were simply violating hospital policy." His voice was ice-cold, professional, but there was something else underneath it. Something that looked almost like panic. "Did you not read the updated protocols regarding patient contact? The liability issues? The infection control measures?" The words hit me like physical blows. I glanced at Janet, hoping for some support, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Dr. Kim looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. The silence stretched on, broken only by the steady beep of Mrs. Chen's heart monitor. I don't understand what I did wrong," I managed to say. "I was off the clock, and I was just..." "Off the clock or not, you are representing this hospital. And this hospital cannot have employees making unauthorized decisions about patient care, especially with high-risk cases." He moved closer to Mrs. Chen's bed, and for a split second, I saw him glance at her chart with what looked like concern. Not medical concern. Something else. "High risk?" I asked. "She's dying, Dr. Harrison. Her family went home exhausted, and I thought she deserved to have someone with her." His jaw tightened. "That's not your decision to make. Your job is respiratory therapy, not whatever this is." He gestured dismissively at the chair I'd been sitting in. "I need to see you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. And Miss Rodriguez..." He paused at the door. "I suggest you review your employment contract very carefully tonight." The threat hung in the air like smoke. After he left, Janet finally looked at me, her expression apologetic but wary. "Honey, you probably should have asked first," she whispered. "Dr. Harrison's been different lately. Real strict about protocols." Dr. Kim lingered for a moment after Janet hurried away. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "what you were doing was beautiful. But Harrison's been cracking down on everything since the state inspection last month. Just be careful." As they left, I was alone again with Mrs. Chen. But something had changed. The warmth I'd felt sitting with her was replaced by a cold knot of fear in my stomach. What protocols had I violated? What liability issues? And why had Dr. Harrison looked so worried when he saw me here? Mrs. Chen's monitor showed her heart rate was slowing. I wanted to take her hand again, but Dr. Harrison's words echoed in my head. Instead, I stood there, helpless, watching a woman die alone because showing compassion had somehow become a fireable offense. The next morning would bring answers I wasn't prepared for. But first, I had to figure out what I'd stumbled into by simply trying to be human in a place that seemed to have forgotten what that meant. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dr. Harrison's face, heard the ice in his voice when he said high-risk cases. By 6 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table in my Logan Square apartment, scrolling through the employee handbook on my laptop, searching for any mention of patient contact policies. The coffee had gone cold in my mug, but my hands were shaking too much to drink it anyway. The morning commute on the Blue Line felt like a death march. Every stop between Logan Square and the Illinois Medical District stretched on forever. I kept replaying the scene in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. Should I have just walked away and let Mrs. Chen die alone? The thought made my stomach turn. Chicago General looked different in the harsh morning light, less like the place where miracles happened and more like a corporate fortress. The November wind whipped off Lake Michigan as I hurried through the main entrance, my badge trembling in my hand as I swiped through security. The whisper started before I even made it to the respiratory therapy department. I caught fragments of conversations that died as soon as people saw me. Heard she was in the ICU all night. Harrison was furious. Violation of protocol. Maria Santos, my closest friend in the department, grabbed my arm as I tried to slip into the break room. "Girl, what happened last night? Everyone's talking about it." Before I could answer, Tom Bradley, our department supervisor, appeared in the doorway. His usually friendly face was grim. "Rodriguez, Dr. Harrison wants to see you in his office." Now, the walk to the administrative wing felt endless. My scrub stuck to my back with nervous sweat, and every step echoed in the polished hallways lined with portraits of distinguished doctors, all men, all white, all looking down at me with what felt like judgment. Dr. Harrison's secretary, a stern woman named Beverly, didn't look up from her computer when I approached. "He's waiting for you," she said, pressing a button on her phone. "Dr. Harrison, Miss Rodriguez is here." His office was exactly what you'd expect from a chief of medicine: mahogany desk, medical diplomas covering one wall, a view of downtown Chicago stretching toward the lake. But what caught my attention were the 3 other people already seated: Tom Bradley, Janet from night nursing, and someone I didn't recognize, a woman in a sharp business suit with a legal pad. "Miss Rodriguez, please sit down." Dr. Harrison gestured to the empty chair facing his desk. I felt like I was in a courtroom. "This is Karen Walsh from Risk Management and Legal Affairs." My heart sank. Legal affairs. This was worse than I'd imagined. "Let's get straight to the point," Harrison continued, opening a thick file folder. "Last night you were found providing unauthorized patient contact in the ICU 3 hours after your shift ended. You were not clocked in, not under supervision, and not following established protocols for patient interaction." "Dr. Harrison," I was just holding her hand. "I wasn't administering any treatments or—" "You were creating liability exposure for this hospital." Karen Walsh's voice was crisp, professional. "What if Mrs. Chen had experienced a medical emergency while you were there? What if your presence had interfered with emergency response protocols? What if the family decided to sue because an unqualified staff member was present during a critical moment?" The words hit me like slaps. "Unqualified? I'm a licensed respiratory therapist. I've been working here for 2 years without a single incident." "Your qualifications are not in question," Harrison said. "Your judgment is." Mrs. Chen was designated as a level 5 patient. Level 5. I'd never heard that term before, but something in the way he said it made the hair on my neck stand up. What does that mean? The silence in the room was deafening. Harrison exchanged glances with Walsh before answering. It means patients who require minimal intervention. Comfort care only. Family interaction is limited to scheduled visiting hours. She was dying alone, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Her family had gone home exhausted. I thought basic human compassion is not your job. Harrison's voice cut through my protest like a blade. Your job is to follow protocols, maintain professional boundaries, and avoid creating situations that could expose this hospital to litigation. Janet shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Miss Rodriguez, she said quietly, there was also the matter of you speaking to the patient in, what language was that? Mandarin. Or I tried to. I was just telling her she wasn't alone. Without proper translation services or family consent, Walsh added, making notes on her legal pad. Another potential liability issue. I felt like I was drowning. Every word I said seemed to make things worse. I don't understand. Since when is showing compassion to a dying patient a fireable offense? Since medical malpractice insurance became the second largest expense in this hospital's budget, Harrison snapped, then immediately composed himself. Miss Rodriguez, I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The world tilted. Administrative leave? 3 days unpaid. During that time, risk management will review the incident, interview relevant staff, and determine appropriate disciplinary action. Walsh slid a document across the desk. This outlines the terms of your suspension and the investigation process. My hands shook as I picked up the paper. The words blurred together, but I caught phrases that made my blood run cold. Potential termination, violation of patient safety protocols, unauthorized medical intervention. I need to ask, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Chen, is she? Harrison's expression flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. Mrs. Chen passed away at 4:17 a.m. Natural causes as expected. Natural causes, as expected. The clinical coldness of those words made me want to scream. She had died alone after all, exactly what I'd been trying to prevent. As I stood to leave, clutching the suspension letter, Tom Bradley finally spoke up. Dr. Harrison, Miss Rodriguez has an exemplary record. This seems like an overreaction to what was clearly a well-intentioned. The road to hell, Mr. Bradley. Harrison's voice was final. Miss Rodriguez, you'll need to surrender your badge and access card to security before you leave the building. The walk of shame through the hospital felt endless. Security escort, surrendering my badge, colleagues staring as I cleaned out my locker, all of it burned into my memory. But the worst part was the question that kept echoing in my head. Why had Dr. Harrison looked so panicked when he found me with Mrs. Chen? As I stood outside Chicago General, clutching my personal belongings in a cardboard box, I realized that my act of compassion hadn't just cost me my job. It had uncovered something that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. But I had 3 days to figure out what that was, and I intended to use every minute. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Word had spread through Chicago General faster than a hospital-acquired infection. Most of the messages were supportive, colleagues outraged that I'd been suspended for showing basic human decency. But 3 messages made my blood run cold. The first was from Maria. Girl, they're interviewing everyone who was on duty that night. They asked me if you'd been acting strange lately, if you'd shown unusual interest in certain patients. What the hell is going on? The second was from Dr. Kim. They questioned me for 2 hours about what I saw in Mrs. Chen's room. They kept asking if you had accessed her medical records or taken any photos. Be careful. Something bigger is happening here. The third message had no name, just a number I didn't recognize. Stop asking questions about Mrs. Chen. Some stones are better left unturned. I stared at that last message until my hand started shaking. Someone was watching me, monitoring my communications. But who? And why was a dying elderly woman suddenly the center of what felt like a conspiracy? I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. My friend Jenny worked in medical records. We'd gone through respiratory therapy school together. If anyone could help me understand what made Mrs. Chen a level 5 patient, It was her. The Starbucks on Michigan Avenue was crowded with the usual mix of medical students, hospital staff, and downtown office workers grabbing their caffeine fix. I spotted Jenny at a corner table, her dark hair pulled back in the tight bun required by hospital dress code. She looked nervous. "This is crazy, what they're doing to you," she said as I sat down. "But I have to tell you, there's been weird activity around certain patient files lately. People requesting records who don't normally need access, files being flagged for administrative review." "What kind of files?" Jenny glanced around, then leaned closer. "Terminal patients. Specifically, terminal patients with good insurance coverage." Mrs. Chin wasn't the first. My coffee suddenly tasted like ash. "What do you mean?" "Look, I could lose my job for telling you this, but..." She pulled out her phone and showed me a document she'd photographed. "Mrs. Chen's insurance authorization shows approved coverage for experimental treatments up to $2.3 million. But look at what treatments she actually received." I studied the blurry image on her screen. Standard palliative care. Basic comfort measures. Nothing experimental. Nothing close to $2.3 million. Where did the rest of the money go? That's what I've been trying to figure out. Jenny's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. There are invoices for treatments that were never administered, equipment rentals for machines that were never delivered, specialist consultations that never happened. The pieces started clicking together in my head, forming a picture I didn't want to see. They're billing insurance for services they're not providing. It gets worse. I cross-referenced other level 5 patients from the past 6 months. Same pattern. Massive insurance authorizations, minimal actual care, families kept at arm's length during final stages. Jesus Christ. I felt sick. How many patients? At least 30 that I've found so far. All terminal, all with excellent insurance, all designated level 5 in their final weeks. Jenny's hands were shaking as she put her phone away. And here's the really scary part. In every case, Dr. Harrison was the attending physician who signed off on the level 5 designation. The anonymous text message suddenly made perfect sense. By staying with Mrs. Chun, by being there during her final hours, I had witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. But what exactly had I seen? "Jenny, I need you to do something for me, but it might be dangerous." She nodded grimly. "What do you need?" "I need to know exactly what time Mrs. Chun was pronounced dead and who was present. The real information, not what they put in the official report." 20 minutes later, Jenny called me back. Her voice was tight with fear. "According to the nursing notes, Mrs. Chun was pronounced dead at 4:17 a.m. by Dr. Harrison. But here's the thing. The electronic badge access log shows Harrison entered the ICU at 4:15 a.m. and left at 4:22 a.m. So he was only there for 7 minutes. That's what the official record says. But I checked the security camera logs." Jenny paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily. The ICU cameras were mysteriously offline from 3:45 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. that night. Technical malfunction, according to the maintenance report. My mind raced. Harrison had been furious to find me there, not because I'd violated protocol, but because I'd been a witness to whatever happened in that 45-minute window when the cameras were conveniently down. "There's one more thing," Jenny whispered. Mrs. Chen's morphine drip was increased significantly at 3:50 a.m., just before the cameras went down. But there's no doctor's order for that increase in her chart. The implication hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just stealing from insurance companies. They were actively hastening deaths to cover their tracks, ensuring patients died before anyone could discover the billing fraud. "Jenny, you need to copy everything you found and hide it somewhere safe. This is murder." "Already done. I've got copies stored in 3 different locations." Her voice was steadier now, resolved. "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with another anonymous text. "Final warning. Drop this now or face the consequences. You have 24 hours. I looked around the crowded Starbucks, suddenly aware that any one of these people could be watching me. The paranoia was creeping in, but it wasn't paranoia if they were actually after you. "I'm going to the police," I told Jenny. "With what?" "We have circumstantial evidence and suspicious patterns, but nothing that definitively proves murder or fraud. They'll just claim it's disgruntled employee accusations." She was right. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. And I knew exactly where to find it. I'm going back to the hospital tonight. Are you insane? They'll have you arrested for trespassing. Not if I'm visiting a patient. I still have friends working there, people who can get me inside. The plan was forming in my head as I spoke. Mrs. Chin wasn't the only level 5 patient. If this is a pattern, there are others. Current patients who might still be saved. Jenny stared at me across the table. You're talking about breaking into a hospital to steal medical records and potentially confronting people who may have committed murder. Do you understand how crazy that sounds? Do you understand that they're killing people for insurance money? I shot back. And I'm the only one who knows, because I was stupid enough to show compassion to a dying woman. The weight of it settled on me like a shroud. 30 patients, maybe more, all dying alone while their final moments were manipulated for profit, all because I decided to hold an old woman's hand. But I wasn't going to let Mrs. Chen's death be meaningless. If showing compassion had put me in the middle of this nightmare, then I was going to use that position to expose the truth. Even if it killed me. Noti pierdes lo que sucederá cuando regrese al hospital. Se escribe para descubrir cómo esta historia se vuelve aún más peligrosa. Getting back into Chicago General at night required calling in every favor I had. Maria agreed to meet me at the employee entrance at 11 p.m., her face pale with worry as she swiped her badge to let me in. "This is insane," she whispered as we walked through the dimly lit corridors. "If they catch you here, it's not just your job, it's criminal trespassing. They're murdering patients, Maria. Mrs. Chin wasn't the first, and she won't be the last if we don't stop this." I kept my voice low, but the urgency was burning through me like acid. We made it to the respiratory therapy break room without incident. Maria had brought printouts of the current ICU patient roster, 3 patients currently designated as level 5. All terminal, all with excellent insurance coverage, all under Dr. Harrison's direct care. Room 314 is Mr. James Patterson, 73, pancreatic cancer. Insurance authorization for $1.8 million in experimental treatments. Maria's hands shook as she read from the papers. Room 318 is Mrs. Sofia Hernandez, 68, advanced liver failure. Authorization for $2.1 million. And the third, room 322, Mr. David Kim, 75, end-stage heart disease. Authorization for $2.4 million. She looked up at me with haunted eyes. All 3 families were told yesterday that visiting hours would be restricted to allow 4 intensive medical procedures. The same pattern. Isolate the patients, keep the families away, then what? I thought about Mrs. Chen's morphine drip being mysteriously increased with no doctor's orders. I need to get to those patient rooms and document everything I can find. If they're going to kill these people tonight, I need evidence. How do you know it'll be tonight? I showed her the anonymous text message. 24 hours. The clock is ticking. We split up. Maria would monitor the hallways and warn me if anyone was coming. I would check each room, photograph whatever I could find, and try to gather concrete proof of the fraud and potential murder. Room 314 first. Mr. Patterson lay unconscious, his breathing labored even with the ventilator support. I checked his 4-drip, standard saline, and minimal pain medication. Nothing close to the experimental treatments his insurance was supposedly paying for. I photographed his chart, his medication orders, everything. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. A handwritten note tucked behind his chart. Increase morphine 300 hours. No orders required. MH approval. MH, Marcus Harrison. Room 318. Mrs. Hernandez was awake but barely responsive. Her daughter had left a rosary on the nightstand and a photo of the family at what looked like a quinceañera celebration. The woman's eyes followed me as I moved around the room, and I saw a tear roll down her cheek. "I'm here to help," I whispered in Spanish. "Estoy aquí para ayudar." Her chart showed the same pattern: massive insurance authorizations, minimal actual care, and another handwritten note about increasing morphine at 3 a.m. Room 322. Mr. Kim was sleeping fitfully, muttering what sounded like Korean words. His bedside table was covered with get-well cards from what must have been dozens of grandchildren. As I photographed his chart, I found not just the morphine note, but something else, a second page detailing how his death would be recorded and who would sign the death certificate. They weren't just planning to kill him. They were planning exactly how to cover it up. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Someone's coming. Get out now!" I shoved the charts back into place and slipped out of room 322 just as I heard the distinctive click of expensive dress shoes on linoleum. Dr. Harrison was making his rounds early, walking purposefully toward the ICU with a small black medical bag in his hand. I ducked into a supply closet and watched through the crack in the door as he entered room 314. He was only there for 3 minutes, but when he came out, he was no longer carrying the medical bag. My phone buzzed again. He's moving to 318. Same pattern. In for 3 minutes, out without the bag. Then on to room 322. I realized with growing horror what I was witnessing. This wasn't just insurance fraud. This was systematic murder, disguised as natural death, with the evidence destroyed and the families none the wiser. And it was happening right now, while I watched helplessly from a supply closet. When Harrison finished his rounds and disappeared down the hallway, I had less than 30 minutes before the increased morphine would take effect. 30 minutes to save 3 lives and expose a conspiracy that reached who knows how deep into the hospital administration. I called 911 from the hospital phone in the supply closet, keeping my voice calm and professional. "This is Chicago General Hospital. I need to report attempted murders in progress in the ICU. 3 patients in rooms 314, 318, and 322 have been given unauthorized doses of morphine. Send police and paramedics immediately." Then I called the Tribune's tip line and left a message with everything I knew, including Jenny's contact information and where she'd hidden the evidence. Finally, I went back to each room and did the only thing I could do. I held their hands and stayed with them until help arrived. The next hour was chaos. Police, paramedics, internal investigators, and hospital administrators all converging on the ICU. Dr. Harrison was arrested at his home at 4:15 a.m., exactly the time he'd planned to return to pronounce the deaths. The investigation that followed uncovered a network of fraud and murder that extended far beyond Chicago General. Harrison had been working with administrators at 6 different hospitals across the Midwest, systematically targeting terminal patients with high insurance coverage. The death toll was estimated at over 200 patients over 3 years. 6 months later, I was back working at Chicago General, not as a respiratory therapist, but as a patient advocate, helping families navigate the medical system and ensuring no patient dies alone. Dr. Harrison was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 12 other doctors and administrators were convicted on federal charges. Mrs. Chen's family established a foundation in her memory, focused on compassionate end-of-life care and medical ethics. They asked me to serve on the board, and I accepted with honor. Sometimes I think about that night, about how a simple act of holding someone's hand led me into the darkest corners of the medical system. But mostly I think about the lives we saved, not just Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Hernandez, and Mr. Kim, who all recovered enough to go home to their families, but all the future patients who will never become victims because we had the courage to speak up. The system tried to punish me for showing compassion. Instead, that compassion became the key to exposing a horror that had been hiding in plain sight. And now, every time I hold a patient's hand, I know I'm not just providing comfort, I'm standing guard against those who would exploit our most vulnerable moments for profit. What do you think about this story? Have you ever witnessed something in a medical setting that didn't seem right? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that expose the reality behind closed doors.